This pattern, it's McCall's M7885, an Angela Clayton pattern, and I wanted to do a little bit of a pattern review now that I've finished the hard part, the bodice. To start out, you make the lining, and this is actually 2 layers of lining, so you cut all the main pattern pieces out of whatever your lining fabric is, and you do that twice. I traced these pattern pieces onto normal paper before I cut them out for ease of use. Sometimes the tissue paper can get really messed up when you're cutting this many times out of the same pattern piece. Piece has 5 pieces, the 2 backs, the 2 sides, and then the front, so you just stitch all of those together. I did have a hard time connecting the front sides to the center front piece, just like around the curves. I found that to be a little bit difficult. They didn't line up perfectly for me. This was more of an issue on the lining when it came to doing the actual main fashion fabric. I found that they wound up lining up a lot easier, so I think that this was just kind of an issue inherent with this lining fabric. Once you get all 5 pieces of each layer of the lining attached, then you're going to need to attach them to each other. I pinned it at the bottom and realized that that was wrong, so this is just showing what it looks like. Then you lay the pieces together and you want to match up all of the seams so that you can stitch in the ditch perfectly. This is really slow going, I just wanted to show, but anytime you're stitching in the ditch like this, it's going to be slow going. That has nothing to do with this pattern, but I wanted to show you about how long this takes. I have this one clip not sped up. You do this for all of the seams, so both of those front seams and then also the side seams. So it's going to be 4 total stitch in the ditches that you're going to have to line up, pin, and then stitch. Also, at the center back on both sides, there is a part that's going to fold over, and that's going to form where the lacing is going to go. And there's a stitch line there that you have to mark. I use this disappearing ink pen. You can already kind of see how the ink is starting to disappear as I sew over it. But I also sewed over all of the stitch in the ditch things. I just took this really slow and did it as close to perfect as I possibly could. I also created a seam 3/8 of an inch away from the original seam to form these boning channels. And then I made a line going directly down the center that's going to form another stitch line. Right there. The most effective way of getting my cat to move out of the way is to give her love. She hates that. Now you're going to stitch down the center line and then 3/8 of an inch away on either side until you form 4 boning channels. She just wants to help. She's just not very helpful. Looks like with all of the front boning channels put in, I did wind up making each boning channel the width of my presser foot. It's a little less than 3/8, but it wound up working better for me. This pattern calls for any kind of boning, so I could have used plastic, but I have found that that conforms oddly to my body, so I decided to use spiral steel for this. It does involve cutting it and then putting these little caps on. I do believe that there's a better tool for this, I just don't have it, so I had to use vice grips to kind of scrunch the little tops on there. I love how this looks with all the boning channels. I just think it looks so beautiful. Up the lining, I had to sew all the way around to make sure the boning doesn't escape the channels, and then I had to attach these sleeve portions to the back, forming where the actual sleeves are going to go and the arm size. Unfortunately, I got to this step and it was kind of the first time I was able to do a real try on, because how the sleeves and neckline fit is pretty important to the fit of the overall garment. I found that the bodice was way too big at the top, so I had to put a little dart in here. This was kind of the only place I could put a dart. Luckily, it was the perfect size and wound up fitting really well after that. The pattern doesn't call for this, but I decided to use the technique of flatlining to cut out the fashion fabric for this bodice. It involves attaching interfacing to the main fabric before you cut it out to help stabilize, to keep it from fraying, and to keep the loose weave of the satin fabric from moving around while I cut. The pattern calls for some applique to be applied, but because of the fabric I'm using, I preferred to attach trim on these princess seams. This isn't part of the pattern, but I do really like how it turned out. This was actually my first time applying trim like this, but I'm happy with how it turned out. It's really princessy, and I think it adds some nice interest there, and I think I like how it looks better than if I had done an applique. Sewing the main part of the bodice goes together about the same way that the lining did. The ruffle is optional in the pattern. I originally wasn't going to do it, but I'm really glad that I did. I had this gold fabric laying around from a different pattern, and it really wound up working nicely with the blue that I had chosen for my main fabric. These sleeves aren't particularly difficult, but they are very time consuming. I think each one of the sleeves took me an hour and a half, so I have really condensed this down for y'all for this video. I have seen people recreate this pattern and leave the sleeves off entirely, and I really like the sleeves. They were time consuming, but I think that they add something so nice and so princessy, and they really do have that historic touch to them that I think really adds something to this dress. And these are French seams on the inside of the sleeves, so there's no exposed edges or anything. They're really well made. The pattern does call for something more like a tulle or a netting or something to be used for the ruffle. I of course used a rather stiff satin. So this next part where I have to gather the whole sleeve to fit within the sleeve band was very difficult. I couldn't gather it just normally like you would with a piece of thread and kind of cinch it because the fabric itself was so stiff that my threads kept breaking, and it wound up just being easier to kind of pleat it like this. That's not to say anything negative about the pattern, that was my personal decision, but I can see how this would have been so much easier and so much quicker if I had chosen a lighter fabric for this. However, the pattern does call for tacking the ruffle up so it doesn't flop over, and I didn't have to do that because the satin does hold up on its own. Everything is so shiny, I just think it looks so nice. I had a video go viral on here and on TikTok talking about the importance of modesty panels in corset back dresses, and I took so much hate for that, and I was humorously surprised to find that this does include a modesty panel or an underlay on this dress, and it does involve being hand stitched, but I think it looks really nice. People had no shortage of mean things to say when I designed one myself, but here Angela Clayton, mother, put one in her dress, so ha. Didn't get any footage of me making these eyelets. They were hand stitched. It involved me poking myself in the hands a lot, and I used a chopstick instead of an awl because I didn't buy an awl. I also stole this ribbon out of the back of a different corset I had made, but look how lovely it matches. I could lace this up on myself semi-well, but I couldn't really get it tight because I can't move my arms as much as I would like, so this is my mom lacing me up. She asked me to not get her bonnet in the shot, and yet I did, and I'm sorry, Mom. I might have to ultimately lace this up not with ribbon because the satin itself is so slippery that it's difficult to keep the corset back totally flush. It does fit well enough to be lined up straight, but it has a hard time staying that way. I have a chemise on. That is what you can see poking out underneath. This is not the skirt that is going to be on the dress. Of course, it's going to be blue and like 15 yards of fabric. But I do have a chemise on underneath this. It's able to lace up perfectly fine over a chemise. I am really happy with it. I was hoping for a little bit more of an 1860s look, and I don't think the front of this is very 1860s. Overall though, incredible pattern. It was really easy to follow along with. There were a lot of steps. It is advanced, but I really liked it. Thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna do a final reveal when I get the skirt all done and attached, but thank you. Please like and subscribe. Happy sewing!